Hello, welcome to our ValEUs podcast series. My name is David Orlov from Nazarbayev University in Astana, Kazakhstan. This podcast is a part of the ValEUs project, the Jean Monnet Policy Network, titled ValEUs Research and Education Network and Contestation to EU Foreign Policy. It's founded from the Erasmus program of the European Commission for a 3-year period starting from January 2024. This ambitious project, involving 20 partner institutions from 17 countries across 5 continents, focuses on scrutinizing the foreign policy of the European Union and the challenges posed to its values. Today with us is Stipe, Buzar, an assistant professor at Libertas International University in Zagreb. Hello, Stipe.
Hi, hello. Thank you,
Uh,
David, for having me on the show.
it's great to see you again. It's been almost a year since we last met. So last
I was it? I think it was in September of last year,
Yes.
right? That we were all in Astana together. Yeah.
Uh, and so last year with Jean-François Caron from our university, you published a book, War on Terror, reflecting on 20 years of policy actions and violence. And now we are working with him again on another book, of which we would be discussing one of the chapters you contributed. And should you just probably begin with the introduction to the book, what's it about?
Oh, excellent. Well, the book, which is an edited volume, which will have some 11, 12, or 13 authors, we'll see in the end. The deadlines are coming up
Mm.
right now, actually. Will be about the way that the war in Ukraine is possibly shaping the future world order. There have been a number of books, in fact, published on similar topics since 2022, obviously, and this one aims to contribute in its own way. We'll have authors from Kazakhstan, obviously, and Croatia. We'll have some authors from an author from Czechia, authors from North America as well, and other parts of Europe. And we're hoping that it will be a valuable addition. Our contract right now is with Routledge,
Mhm.
and the initial phase of the process for the book, applying it with chapter abstracts and all of that has been very successful. We are hoping that it will be published sometime in early 2026.
Mhm.
Uh, the title was supposed to be something like the war in Ukraine and the shaping of things to come, but of course the publisher will have the last word on that, so we'll see what title we have in the end.
Okay. And the title of your chapter would be Empire of Lies, Russian Contestation of Western Values and the International Order. And I personally love this chapter because I'm local from this region and I could tell how the arguments are appealing because I could see how people react to these narratives. And would you be able to introduce us to some of the key concepts of this chapter, such as Empire of Lies, Russkiy Mir, what it constitutes, who belongs to it, and who belongs to the Empire of Lies? Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for saying that you liked the chapter. You are, in fact, one of its first readers. I mean, it will go through a review process, obviously, but it's a vote of confidence that someone from outside of the book project
Mm.
had a chance to look at my draft and actually liked it. So the title starts with the phrase "Empire of Lies," which is a phrase that caught my eye, or rather caught my ear all the way back in 2022. In fact, on February 24th, 2022, which is the date that everyone knows right now. It may be like one of those dates, like where were you on 9/11, or where were you when Kennedy was shot? The two of us weren't born when Kennedy was shot, but
Mhm.
and you probably wouldn't remember where you were on 9/11. But you probably remember hearing about the beginning of the so-called special military operation, which now everyone calls simply the war in Ukraine. And I remember it was something like 4 in the morning in Zagreb. I didn't hear it at 4 in the morning. I heard it later that morning, and it was probably 6 o'clock or something like that in Moscow, as Vladimir Putin was addressing the nation, right, and explaining to them that the special military operation, as he called it, was beginning that morning, right? In order to denazify, demilitarize, and all of the things that he was claiming. Before I get to the expression Empire of Lies, one of the things that particularly struck me about that speech is that I'm ready to be corrected on the details here. I think it was something like 22, 24 minutes long, something like that. And it really didn't mention Ukraine at all until more than 15 minutes into the speech. Was it 16 or 18? I don't remember in particular. So the large part of the speech that he made there, the address that he made there, was about the world order, about Russia's place in it, about how it had been treated unfairly for decades, especially since the end of the Cold War. And one of the phrases that he used, a particular phrase that he used to sort of frame the enemy, there was the expression empire of lies. And by the empire of lies, he meant, I suppose, I mean, he said outright, the US and its Western allies. He, I think, sort of tried to phrase it as Western vassals, perhaps more than allies, but still somehow the liberal world order with NATO in it, of course, which is run or led by the US. And he used the expression empire of lies to state that what the US and its allies were trying to do to Russia, and perhaps other parts of the world as well, but Russia in particular, was push forward their values for a specific reason in order to destroy Russian society from within, because the values which they were pushing were actually false values. One of the things that I've had to contend with, well, not really me, one of the things that he should contend with is to make clear whether these values are proper and correct for the West, but simply unsustainable for other parts of the world, or whether they are indeed false values in a universal sense, which he sometimes also claims. He claims that these values are against human nature and so on and so forth. So with this phrase, he sort of frames an overall enemy, which is a perpetual danger towards not only Russia's security, sovereignty, political stability, political independence, so on and so forth, but to all of the Russian people, or if you will, all of the peoples within Russia and its kind of sphere of influence. So, more or less.
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting because it's a little bit contradictory. Because as you argue in the chapter, Russia and Putin specifically uh, argue for the cohabitation of civilizations. We are
Yes.
different, but we should be able to live all together on this globe. But at the same time, he completely criticizes Western ideas as being contrary to human nature.
Yes, because well, the argument would be, and it's a sustainable argument up to a point. I suppose that that Western values, or at least those who are the holders of Western values, have the ambition to make them universal throughout the globe, and that doesn't really work. He's certainly not the first person, nor the first statesman to have claimed something like that. It's a well-known. It's a well-known kind of position. I believe it was back in 1993, prior to the signing of the Declaration of Human Rights that was signed in Bangkok, that I cannot remember now which Asian politician said something like, European values are not European values, they're European. Asian values are universal values. So this kind of debate has been going on for a while. And 1993 was this supposed moment of unipolarity throughout the globe, and perhaps not just supposed, perhaps a real moment of unipolarity and U.S. power. But that's a different question. So this has been going on for a long time, really. He now sort of tries to push that sort of argument as well.
Yeah, and why does he need this moral justification for the war? Because in terms of security concerns, for example, NATO's expansion has been discussed since at least 2008 in Munich. and now he
Hmm.
decides to use this moral argument. And was there this moral argument, for example, during the Russo-Georgian War in 2008?
Okay. So, if I understand correctly, the question would be, if security concerns are enough,
Yeah,
then why introduce moral vocabulary into this whole
yeah,
thing at all? Well, it seems that just security concerns, as they are viewed, let's say, from the top, from those who frame foreign policy in any given country, right? That just security concerns are never enough for action. This is a point I like to make often. And they're never enough for action because even political elites, regardless of whether we're talking about democratic countries, autocratic countries, or whatever their deal is, right? Whatever their deal is, uh, 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 political elites have to have some kind of consensus with the wider population. Whether they arrive at it through a system of referenda, elections, or whether there's an unwritten social contract between them doesn't matter. But values it turns out always do matter. So it may be enough for security experts, and it may be enough for foreign policy elites to think simply in security terms, but it is never enough for the wider populations whose consent, in one way or another, they ultimately need. So it has to be done through values. Uh, of course, perhaps there's a lot more to be said there, because these are not exactly the values that you might find coming from the same center in Moscow, right, from the Kremlin 50 or 70 years ago. So maybe your question is about that as well. It seems that one of the truly relevant processes that happened as the Cold War ended, right, as the Cold War ended, was not simply the collapse of Soviet power, was not simply the collapse of the power that the Kremlin can wield. It was also a collapse of the sort of intellectual and, of course, ideological basis for the foreign policy which the Soviet Union had. And after this collapse, Russia is left, it seems, without a clear ideological basis for its foreign policy. And there has been a scramble for decades now to find it. And it seems that the best that has been come up with so far is some kind of an idea of a Russian world with its particular moral values, with its particular cultural and civilizational values. And to an extent, I suppose this could have been foreseen, especially given the relevant literature in IR, that was in international relations, that was very popular during the 90s. On the one hand, I mean, just to name the two most, I suppose, two most famous texts from the period. One, which you know of very well, David. One, Fukuyama's The End of History, right? The other, Huntington's A Clash of Civilizations. So the ideological grounds, not simply for conflict, but for foreign policy, may be out, and cultural values seem to
mhm,
be in. Um, and it was a narrative both in academia, both in domestic and foreign policies, and I mean the actual practices of various states. So I suppose they somehow arrived at that, not through a clear, concerted academic or intellectual
mhm.
effort, but as you do in politics in real life, they stumbled upon it to an extent, worked on it. Um, Intellectuals in Russia who were able to frame it into concrete texts, right? And books sort of gained prominence, and that was it, I suppose.
And how do you
It's an
think?
imperfect process, that's for sure.
Uh-huh. And how do you think to what extent this moral framing is genuine in terms of whether Putin himself, his inner circle, intellectuals like Dugin, sincerely believe in this moral framework. Uh, Such as, for example, Dugin claims, you mentioned it in the chapter as well, that in his
Huh?
view, end of liberalism, Fukuyama's end, uh,
Hmm.
end of ideology,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
liberalism in a pejorative sense, he says, because it's a consumerist culture, etc. And to what extent do they really believe that their values are more important and significant compared to the Western ones? Or is it just a populist claim to mobilize society against a common enemy?
Okay. First of all, I think that really is a very important question. Um, and the answer that I would usually offer to that is not completely simple. It's not just a yes or no. So I'd start from this, just as a philosopher, as an ethicist.
Mhm,
I'd start with the following point. Uh, Generally, I don't believe, uh, or the other way around. I believe that people are, for the most part, actually genuine about the moral claims that they make. Okay?
mhm,
At least in one way. Now, I don't want to sound overly naive about it, and I don't mean it in a naive way. So let's put it this way. I believe that people genuinely do not believe that they themselves are evil.
mhm,
Okay? And the person who would genuinely believe that he or she themselves is evil would probably just take their own life
mhm,
at that point. It's a guess, it's an assumption that I cannot prove,
mhm,
but and we know this because whatever bad thing we do, any of us, we always have a rationalization, and that rationalization is more often than not, or always, a moral rationalization.
mhm,
So somehow we are always the good guy, and that just goes for for everyone, I think. So if we take that as a starting point, we're closer to being able to take these claims, at least to an extent, at face value. If
mhm,
they say that certain values are important to them, it might actually be true that they're important to them. Um, of course, one might say that, well, don't they do horrible things to people in the protection of those values? And isn't that hypocritical? But we might find that anywhere in the world, really.
mhm,
And we might find any individual human being sort of crossing the line, making trade-offs, and so on and so forth. And when a statesman believes that they're defending an entire country, that might even mean thousands or tens of thousands or millions of dead as something more or less morally justified. Of course, as they go deeper down the rabbit hole, it's more difficult to get out, right? But everyone finds some kind of justification for themselves, and it's never just a strategic justification. It's always a moral justification, because as I suppose, as Camus said, you know, the, the first question that everyone has to address is that of suicide,
mhm,
right? So if they believe that they were truly evil, I'm guessing that that's what they would do. So that's number one, just the clear philosophical point. Another thing is that comes to mind and another writer, quite popular, in fact, that you might know of, the American historian Stephen Kotkin.
Yep.
He's quite famous nowadays, really, for writing. I think still not finished with his Stalin biography, right? I think we're still waiting for the third part. I know I haven't read the third part, so
Mhm.
I'm guessing it still might not be out.
He's quite
And
popular here.
one of the things that Kotkin is known for is to have sort of lost much of his hair and eyesight while poring over various documents from the Soviet period, and this included even stuff like table talks. It included minutes of their meetings that would go on long into the night when some of these leaders are almost asleep and maybe drunk and all of this, and when there's only a few of them left. And he realized that even in those moments, they still speak the proper ideological language.
Mhm.
And when he was asked what is his most important, his most relevant finding from poring over all of these documents for years and years, his most relevant finding about the Soviets and the Soviet leadership, and he said, well, the most important finding is that they were actually communists.
Mhm.
It sounds like a strange point, but that they were, once you think about it, that they were communists through and through,
Uh-huh.
that it wasn't just something which they put on for show, that they were, in fact, true believers. And that once you go through all of the minutes of all of the meetings or whatever he went through, that it becomes kind of clear. So, whether this began for strategic reasons, whether it began based on, the accumulation of power in domestic politics, which surely can be the case, and probably is at some point, and we can never give, a clear point there. When does it actually begin? But through a process, I think that these leaders, Putin himself probably, this inner circle around him, the intelligentsia like Dugin who speak about this, do believe it.
Mhm.
The main difference, they believe that these are their values, that they have to defend them. I like looking at it, face value. Um, the big difference between that and the Soviet case decades and decades ago now is that the intellectual framework for the Soviet value system and the way it influenced foreign policy had been, it was set decades before a Soviet Union even existed.
Mhm.
There was a strong intellectual framework given in the 19th century. Then the early Soviets also worked on it and added their particulars to it. And so, how we do talk, of course, of Marxism, Leninism, for instance. Without either of those two parts, we can't use that particular phrase. But there was an intellectual basis for it. And after, and, they had a revolution based on it.
Mhm.
But if we look at the period after the end of the Cold War, no such basis is apparent or clear. So, as I said, there's a scramble. It's not altogether clear whether all of these actors would subscribe to the same set of values.
Mhm.
It's not like they have a clear catechism about it, right?
Huh.
Uh, well, they do have those Russian foreign policy reports and things, and things are relatively clearly set there. So I do believe that they believe it, but it's much more of a mess
Mhm.
than it used to be in the ideological struggles of the 20th century.
I
Right.
also do believe that most of them at least believe it, but also I had a concern about sincerity because of this isn't this commitment to multipolarity more reflection of weakness than genuine conviction? Because during the Soviet period, Russia, when Moscow was strong, they did not care about multipolarity when they were themselves a hegemon and could impose their will. And now that
Ah,
Russia is not that strong and it cannot confront the US or even China in the real politics, they have to sell this ideology both within the nation and globally to demonstrate that they're still there and should be considered, although they cannot oppose openly.
yes, yes. Well, I think you're right there. The literature in international relations that talks about status powers and stuff like that really does describe Russia as a power in decline for for a long period of time. Let's keep in mind, of course, that during the Soviet period, they weren't trying for anything like unipolarity, nor could they have ever been close to anything like that, really. But they were, I suppose, at least in the later Cold War period, content with having something like an ongoing bipolar system,
Mm-hmm.
right? They lose that completely, realize that they're not going to be able to get it back, at least not in this century, while the cards are stacked in this particular way. Uh, so they opt for arguing for something like multipolarity. That is clearly, as you said, a sign of their declined, if not declining, still
Mm-hmm.
power. However, I think the most important thing to note there is that when they talk of a multipolar world, uh, they're thinking, I suppose, mostly of three poles, right? And this is clear to everyone, the US,
Mm-hmm.
China, and them, right? And they're the ones pushing for multipolarity rather than bipolarity because in a new bipolar setting, they would not be a pole.
Mm-hmm.
You're absolutely right there. Uh, the interesting part of it is where they see the borders
Mm-hmm.
of the spheres of influence, right? And the new way in which they're framing it, again, is not ideological in the old 20th century sense, where these would be then communist countries, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what the Soviet bloc had, but they see it in civilizational terms, in terms of the concept of the Russian world and so on and so forth. And then the other interesting thing is to see that there is a kind of cynicism about it, I suppose. The cynical part being not that they don't believe that they are a civilization founded on certain
Mm-hmm.
values. That part, again, I stress, I take at face value, and I kind of think we should do that. The cynical part is that they argue for a fully multipolar world globally, but on the other hand, argue for complete regional unipolarity. So they are the only relevant actor within their pole, and they make all the choices. That's the part that's kind of cynical, right?
Mm-hmm. Of course, especially from from the perspective of someone from Kazakhstan, where do we fall?
Absolutely.
Yes, and Dugin, for example, he is a persona non grata in Kazakhstan. He cannot come to Kazakhstan. His websites are forbidden in Kazakhstan. Yeah.
I remember you telling me that
Yeah.
last September. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And they advocate for this civilizational peace, but at the same time, do we fall into the same civilization, or are we a Turkic nation, Muslim majority,
Mhm.
Sunni majority? So how we could probably have our own path, but are we allowed to from their perspective?
Right. I don't know very much about the case of Kazakhstan, but I do know from some reading, of course, from my visit there, and some conversations with you, and some conversations with Jean-François Caron, right?
Mhm.
That language rights are are a big deal there, which are secured now, I suppose, right? But were a pretty big question in decades past. And on the other, Kazakhstan might be, I mean, you know a lot more about this than I do. Kazakhstan is probably one of the most interesting case studies there is, the most interesting case study there is on the relationship between Russia and another country upon whom it claims a sphere of influence.
Mhm.
Because on the one hand, uh, there's an invitation to Russian tanks in what was it, 2021?
Yeah,
On the other hand, there's a cold distancing that has
yeah,
been happening
yeah.
for decades, really. Kazakhstan has its own thing, its own sort of regional power. But again, you know a lot more about this than I do.
Yeah, also there are other actors such as China and Russia should consider their interests here as well. And last summer, just a few months before your arrival to Astana, Secretary Xi and Putin they met in Astana, and we discussed it with Jean-François Caron. What's the goal of this meeting? And Caron assumed that potentially Putin was trying to sell this idea of multipolarity to China. So
Ah, right.
think about that and whether it's true, whether Putin could be successful in selling this idea to China, Global South, Iran.
Right. I think for this kind of question, we can go back to something I said, or talked about rather, in in an earlier answer. As I said, after the Cold War ends, right? The ideological and intellectual basis for opposition to what was considered a unipolar order is
Mm-hmm.
not clear, right? In terms of pure power, sure, what you need to do is build up stronger states, right? Have more weapons, be richer, be more financially influential, all of these things. But an ideological and value basis for a multipolar world was not altogether clear. And within this, we see the emergence of not one, but a plethora, really, of new concepts. Just on the Russian side, it's Russkiy Mir, right, the Russian world. But another one that used more broadly and far more vaguely than the concept of the Russian world, even though the Russian world as a concept is not altogether clear,
Mm-hmm.
is this concept of the global south,
Yeah.
right? A concept that seems to be near and dear to Chinese
Mm-hmm.
foreign policy makers, right, and others as well. And it's terribly unclear in many ways because first of all, it's certainly not a proper geographical term,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because uh, not all of the countries of the global south are indeed in the geographical south of the world. And if we look at it in terms of demographic distribution, I think the situation would become even worse,
Mm-hmm.
right? For using that term. So I think it's one of those concepts that has uh, somehow organically cropped out of this post-Cold War scramble for finding a new ideological basis for something, right? For resisting U.S. power, for dethroning the West, or whatever. But it's not a very well thought out concept. What exactly Putin was trying to convince Xi of, if he was trying to convince him of anything, is altogether unclear. But one thing that they have in common, I'm sure,
Mm-hmm.
for such a conversation is that both of their, what do we call them, foreign policy machines, right, or decision making and analyses and all of these things are searching for new concepts in
Mm-hmm.
order to be able to phrase and frame their foreign policy ambitions.
Okay. Probably the last question for this
Okay.
podcast. It's a little bit personal question because, as you might remember, my research focuses on anti-fascism. And one of the first words that you mentioned during this podcast today was denazification, and it was
Right.
the main the main topic of the whole initial months, probably the first year of the war in Ukraine. And you never mentioned it in this chapter. Why is it the case?
I never mentioned it in this chapter.
Mhm.
Right.
Why
By now,
is not?
well,
Yeah.
I think there might be several very innocent reasons
Uh-huh.
that are methodological, I suppose, or somewhat methodological more than anything else. First of all, I've published one, two, or three texts
Mm.
having to do with the Russian engagement, the war in Ukraine. Uh, Three texts so far. In fact, two of them are in Croatian, so not really
Uh-huh.
accessible to many readers. But the translation technology is actually pretty good right now, so you
Mhm.
could get the gist of it. You, David, I know could actually read Croatian, but most people, of course, couldn't. And one was actually in English, published in Poland.
Mhm.
And I'm quite sure that I mentioned, at least in the first two texts,
Okay.
these concepts. The texts are referred to in this chapter, or will be referred to in this chapter. The other thing is uh, the sort of voicing of these concepts from the Kremlin,
Mhm.
I think isn't or hasn't been done as often recently as it was in the earlier parts of the
Yeah.
war. Uh, so I simply try to refocus on other things. Um, uh, when Putin calls the West the empire of lies, he's not quite calling them fascists,
Mhm.
right? Or Nazis.
Yeah.
He's calling them something else. He's invoking what he considers a different kind of evil,
Yeah.
right? Um, so it just sort of didn't fit the most necessary vocabulary that I needed for
Mm.
this paper. I think it's only that.
Okay.
I'll give it another read now that you've said that, and of course.
Yeah, well, I found it
Maybe,
interesting.
maybe some of the reviewers also say
Mm.
that I need to include it in some way, so I'll give it another read.
Yeah,
But
indeed.
these are the reasons.
Yeah, I see. Well, all right. Thank you very much for this great discussion, and
Okay,
I look
I
forward
hope it
to
was
reading
useful.
the book. Yeah, thanks a lot, and hopefully, yeah, our viewers would love it.
And a big hello from everyone in Zagreb to
Hmm.
you and the rest of the crew in Astana.
Yeah, thanks a lot.